Hello and welcome to the Practical Animal channel. The channel is for you if you want to know what it takes to work with animals. Perhaps you want to work with domestic or wild animals. If with domestic animals, that could be with farm animals or companion animals such as dogs and cats. On the other hand, if you want to work with wildlife, that could be as part of a collection in a zoo, or it could be in the wild. Whatever species you want to work with, we aim to cover it all. Most weeks I carry out an interview with an animal industry professional, asking that person what it takes to work with his or her chosen field of expertise. My guest today is Phil Mountain. Phil is co-director of Birdstrike Management Ltd, which is a global wildlife consultancy focused on a fascinating area of the animal industry, the human-wildlife conflict. In this context of wildlife strike prevention at airports. Birdstrike Management Ltd sit on specialist panels at, for instance, the International Civil Aviation Organization and the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, and it works globally, advising airports and airlines on wildlife hazard management. Its areas of work include ornithological field work to identify and monitor wildlife hazard, aerodrome wildlife hazard management standards checks, and it also carries out quality assurance. It also carries out risk assessments, training, airline wildlife hazard management standards check programs, aerodrome safeguarding consultancies, and, most interesting perhaps, wildlife strike remains identifications. This is a really niche area of the animal industry, and I'm delighted to welcome Phil to talk about his work. Now, enjoy. Phil Mountain, Director of Birdstrike Management Ltd. Welcome to the Practical Animal channel.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Please, can you describe your career in wildlife management from the start to date?
Absolutely. It's slightly odd. I worked in the power industry actually from leaving school, gathering a handful of GCSEs, and then did a degree in environmental science as a mature student. That enabled me to start with, as it was, math in 1999 in a dedicated wildlife management team, where I started my 20 years of working in wildlife management, specifically birdstrike management. In 2013, we left the government and started Birdstrike Management Ltd, and have been doing that ever since.
Phil, what has been your proudest moment during your work?
Well, one of the things about the work that I do is I'm able to be personally proud of the work that I do on a pretty regular basis. When the recommendations I make to improve flight safety have been actioned and improvements in flight safety are achieved, that gives me an immense amount of personal satisfaction. And that's what I love about the job. It does give you that feedback quite regularly. It's a good thing to be able to do.
Phil, what is your biggest guilty pleasure at work?
Birding abroad, to be perfectly honest. I get to travel extensively all across the world and find myself in some fantastic areas for bird watching. So I not only get to see a lot of birds, I get paid for doing it as well. In fact, next week I'll be working in the Arabian Gulf, surveying birds on a desert island, which I'm really looking forward to.
Phil, what are the skills, experiences and personal qualities that have been key to your success in running Birdstrike Management Ltd?
The industry is a technical industry, and biology and ornithology tends to fall between the cracks. And I think one of the successes of BML is we have a deep understanding of applied ornithology. We come at the problem from an ornithological perspective, which works. So a lot of the skills we have are in understanding the birds and managing the birds. Coupled with that is people skills, understanding and influencing the decision makers is key. We can understand the birds all day, but at the end of the day, to improve flight safety, you have to understand people and be able to work with people in order to affect change. And I suppose running through that is just the honesty and passion that we have for the subject. When we start working with a customer, it's soon obvious that we are passionate about the results. It is in our blood, and it is what we do. So it's a combination really of the ornithological approach, the people skills, and the passion we have for the work that we do.
How can somebody learn people skills if they feel they don't have them particularly developed?
That's, again, a very good question. I think listening is very important. I think having an open mind is equally important. Certainly if anybody starts working abroad in different cultures, different countries, then having an open mind and trying to listen and understand their perspective and respect their perspective is key. So I think understanding people comes from being honest, being open, and listening to people. And I think as soon as people realize that their point of view is taken on board and they are part of the process, then bridges can be built and progress can be made.
3 people, books, or conferences have most influenced your thinking, either as a businessman or as an ornithologist?
I guess it comes down to the answer to the last question, really. I found through doing this work that I am more of a people person than I perhaps thought I was. So again, thinking about the answer to this question, the three answers are actually 3 people. Firstly, my business partner, Andy Baxter. We think as one, which is really rather useful in business. He's a very intelligent, astute manager. He understands the subject inside out, and working with him and batting ideas between ourselves has been invaluable in my personal development and also the development of the company. Secondly, a guy called Tony Peck, who's the safety manager at an airline that we've worked with for over a decade. He had a vision of reducing burst strike risk and had the trust in our approach. And it was very useful understanding and working with him for many, many years to understand, again, a different perspective, the perspective of wildlife strike from an airline, which again was very, very useful. And then lastly, a great mentor of mine was Dr. John Allen, who is an international expert on Birdstrike management and headed the government team I started with. I owe a lot to him. He's forward-thinking. His approach to risk management has been very, very important in my development. So really, it's been people who I've really focused on as being catalysts for my development and the development of BML.
That's really interesting. Phil, what is your view of the wildlife and bird strike avoidance industry today?
Again, I've really liked doing this. The questions are really get you thinking about things perhaps from a different perspective. I put 3 bullet points down for this answer. Frustration, firstly, as naivety of wildlife management is still endemic really across the world. Again, going back, it is a technical field, and biology tends not to be very present. So when you have technicians trying to manage a biological system, it tends to be quite a naive approach. But then from that brings optimism, because there is a change. Through my career, I've seen wildlife management being viewed in a more positive light, and people starting to recognise that it is manageable and should be tackled. And then hope, we can still make a difference. And again, going back to an earlier question, I get a lot of job satisfaction in the fact that progress is being made. And if airports and airlines are open-minded and take the risk seriously, then significant improvements can be made. So it's all three really: frustration, optimism, and hope.
How do you see the wildlife and bird strike avoidance industry developing over the next 10 years?
I think there'll be a gradual decline in global aviation over time. However, safety maintaining is still paramount, and I think as the resources in the industry might diminish and as aircraft movement rates might reduce, the potential for wildlife strikes is potentially to increase. Therefore, the need to effectively manage this risk will be potentially more of a priority than it currently is. I mean, we did see sort of spikes in bird strikes through the COVID the COVID restrictions, especially the first big spike. So I can see with a reduction in effort, the bird strikes may increase, and obviously as aircraft airframes and engines become more and more expensive, the need to manage that risk is not going to go away. So I think from an industry, a wildlife management industry perspective, I don't feel there will be a reduction in the need for the services.
And how did COVID affect things for the business?
For us, twofold. We managed to keep. We've got through it. We maintained services that we provided for our key airports, particularly in the UK. Obviously, travel was a big blocker, and we were prevented from travelling to a lot of our customers for well over 12 months. That's starting to come back now. Like I say, I'm travelling again next week, and we're out in West Africa a couple of weeks ago. So it's starting to come back. The industry realises that there were restrictions, and mediums like the medium I'm talking to you today, Zoom and other remote mediums, have meant that we've been able to maintain contact and provide guidance during this period. But it's just been difficult rather than a cessation of work.
And Phil, what happens when you have to deal with an endangered species on the airfield?
Again, a good question. And again, looking at it from an ornithological perspective, as you can possibly imagine, endangered species, by definition, tend not to be generalist or opportunistic or opportunists. They tend to require more niche habitats and environments, and because of that, they are few and far between generally, but even more so on an airside environment, which tends to be a man-made environment. So fortunately, it doesn't tend to occur occasionally. However, it does, and we always look at passive methods of control. So habitat management to reduce attractants for the species and encourage them to seek attractants in adjacent areas or more safe areas. It hasn't been a problem to be faced with a species that you cannot influence because of the fact that they're less likely to be on man-made habitats in the first place. And if they are, their niche is quite defined, so it's often quite easy to encourage them to leave naturally.
That's a fascinating insight into where general principles of ecology come into the job, I think. Phil, what is the role of trained birds of prey in bird strike avoidance management?
Again, a very interesting subject area. It is used globally. It's used in South America, in North America, in some of the Mediterranean countries, quite frequently. The view of a lot of wildlife managers, including ourselves and myself personally, is it's inappropriate on an airfield where there's active aircraft for two reasons. One is it puts another bird in the air, and there has been documented evidence of falcons being involved in bird strikes. And secondly, whilst a hunting bird, are highly trained, they will chase prey in the direction that the prey go, and that can increase bird strike risks. If it's a bird that's trained to the lure, they can vacate, they can leave the airfield, in which case the bird controller is a duty, obviously, to recover the bird, and that can result in gaps in provision. So whilst falconry is very, very good at bird scaring, in an active airfield environment, we tend to not advocate its use. Obviously, if it's a quiet aircraft or a military airbase where there are periods where there's no flying, they can add to the control of the airfield itself, making the airfield less attractive to hazardous birds. So, generally speaking, for active civil airports, we tend to advise that it's not used.
What advice can you offer somebody wanting to get into wildlife and bird strike avoidance management for aviation purposes? What jobs are out there?
Particularly when we're looking for staff, we're looking for people with a real passion for birds, not just having done a module on ornithology as a degree, but having bird watching as a core part of their lives, really. Because I think that sort of sixth sense a bird has is vital, and we look at that as a big key feature. Similarly, as I mentioned before, the ability to develop interpersonal skills is important. You know, if we're bringing somebody on from college, we don't expect that to be perfectly honed, but we do try and encourage people to develop that listening skills, the ability to deal with people in a professional manner. So it's not just the ornithology; it is dealing with people, which is an important part. And actually, the more you do this kind of work, the more you realise when you take a step back, it is actually people management. And getting people to understand the importance of flight safety and managing wildlife in a responsible way. It's not just the academic, it is dealing with people, it is being a good person, it is coming across as being genuine. So I think if anybody wants to get into wildlife, human wildlife conflict management, which is actually quite a broad sphere of work, have a genuine interest, but also realise that it is the interpersonal skills that really make a difference. And that's when we're looking for staff. It's that confidence in the subject matter, but it's also the ability to come across as in a positive way, and resolve conflict in a positive and an achievable way. So two main factors: the passion for the subject and the ability to deal with people in a professional manner, really.
That's brilliant. Phil, is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, actually, I think those questions. I think the question set that you put to me have been quite thought-provoking for myself, and it's made me reflect on the passion I have for my job. If anybody had asked me 25 years ago, would I be involved in birdstrike management, I would have looked at them very quizzically. I'd have never heard of it. And sometimes you end up getting into a subject area you never thought you would do, just by following your passion and by following the opportunities that arise. So for anybody out there wanting to work in wildlife, I would always go for it. I would always try, be honest, have a passion for what you're doing, and that is the only advice I can give, really. There are a lot of people out there wanting to work in wildlife, but you have to have that passion, and you have to be able to deal with people. So if you can identify that you need to work on your personal skills, then do that. If you need to work on your birding skills, do that. But whatever you do, if you still feel that this is the field that you want to work in, then stick with it, because somebody's got to be able to do it, and why can't it be you?
Phil Mountain, co-director of Birdstrike Management Ltd. Thank you very much for being on the Practical Animal channel.
It's a pleasure.